It's been a pleasure bringing you these episodes. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your subscription. And most importantly, thank you for coming back each week. Today, the topic's a little different. Experts said the world was supposed to be flat. What happened? Look through the lenses of steel, and you'll see something quite different and certainly not flat. Let me begin with a simple question. What is the global price of, say, hot rolled steel, commercial grade? Now, you might say, surely there must be one single global price. A ton of steel is a ton. But here's the problem. Hot rolled coils today trade at roughly $450 to $470 per ton in China, about $750 in Europe, and approaching $1,000 in the United States. That's not a simple difference. That's not freight. That's not currency fluctuation. That's about 40 to 50%, sometimes nearly 100% gap for the same product. So let's ask the obvious question. What happened to globalization? For 30 years, we were told the world was flattening. Trade would integrate markets, arbitrage would eliminate distortions, prices would converge, but steel is telling us something quite different. There's no single global price anymore. Perhaps there never truly was. Logistics mattered, quality mattered, duties existed. But these are frictional differences. What we are seeing now is a structural divergence, and the reason is straightforward. Steel stopped being just a commodity. It became a strategic asset. Let's look at the United States. Steel tariffs were introduced under Section 232 on the basis of national security grounds. That was strategy and not economics. Europe had quotas. And now CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjusted Mechanism, which means carbon content now affects import pricing into Europe. Steel is no longer just about iron and coal. It's about emissions. Coming to India, India protects its domestic industry through safeguard duties, anti-dumping measures, and quality norms. In the Southeast Asia, barriers against China, especially for steel, are rising. So this isn't market randomness. This is policy architecture. And what that creates effectively is four steel worlds. First, China, roughly, say, $450 per ton for hot rolled steel. China sets the marginal global price. This price influences Africa, Middle East, parts of Southeast Asia. China's overcapacity keeps prices low in these markets. But access to Chinese steel is no longer politically neutral. Increasingly, countries are hedging against dependence on China. Then look at India. India broadly tracks China, but runs roughly perhaps 10% higher. That's because India has scale, a massive domestic population, huge infrastructure spending, and strong internal absorption. India can afford a slightly higher price because demand is predominantly domestic. That's a luxury smaller economies do not have. Now let's look at Europe, especially the EU. It's about 30% above China. Energy costs are higher. There's greater environmental compliance requirements. Now there's CBAM barriers, carbon pricing. So European steel carries a policy premium. It is priced inside a regulatory ecosystem in EU. Then we come to the United States, the highest prices of all, about 25% above Europe. And this isn't accidental. It reflects tariffs, industry consolidation, infrastructure stimulation, reshoring ambitions. The United States is effectively running a managed steel market. Efficiency has been subordinated to resilience. Now let's pause here. Is this deglobalization or is it something subtler? Because trade hasn't stopped. Ships are still moving, contracts are being signed, but what has changed is this: the world is no longer one market. It has multiple strategic blocks. Instead of one global benchmark, we now have regional price references. Instead of arbitrage closing gaps, policy maintains them. The invisible hand now operates within geopolitical boundaries, and this is where scale becomes decisive. Steel is brutally capital intensive, from mining iron ore to securing coking coal to operating blast furnaces, rolling mills. You need enormous capital and sustained demand. That's why countries like India can sustain domestic ecosystems, but smaller countries like the United Kingdom, Australia struggle to maintain end to end capacity. Even Korea and Japan, highly advanced producers, are investing abroad. Why? Because domestic market is shrinking. Competition from China is relentless. In a fragmented world, survival depends on scale. Now, this is the critical point. Steel is not the end of the story, it's the beginning. We, sim- we see similar dynamics in rare earths and critical elements. Markets are thin, opaque, volatile, and governments are stepping in. There are discussions around preferential trade blocs, referencing mechanisms for pricing, adjustable tariffs to uphold price floors, which means price is no longer purely discovered by markets. It is shaped by policy. And this is a real shift. Pricing is becoming strategic, not just an outcome of supply and demand, but a tool of industrial design. Governments fear concentration risk. They fear weaponized supply chains. They fear dependency, so they're willing to pay more for security. That choice comes with consequences: higher regional prices, capital duplication, reduced efficiency. The trade off is clear: resilience over optimization, security over minimization. We're looking at a new economic order where globalization has not disappeared but has fractured. The 90s were about efficiency, the 2020s is about sovereignty. Steel, the most traditional of commodity, is quietly revealing this transformation. There is no single global price anymore. There are strategic prices, regional prices, policy shaped prices, and if steel is in the early stages, critical minerals and battery materials will be next. This is not chaos, it is managed fragmentation from the steel trenches. That fragmentation is impossible to ignore. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. Share it with your friends and colleagues, and do subscribe because it's subscription that allows me to continue with this channel. Have a lovely day. Thank you. Spanish Elias signing off from the steel trenches.